2. The carnival is coming. Chapter 9. A month after the abortion, the last week of June, Amy was working at the dive, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and noon to 6 on Saturday. The place was jumping every minute with tanned and energetic crowd of teenagers. At 6 o'clock Saturday evening, as Amy was getting ready to go home, Liz Duncan came in looking like $1,000,000 in tight red shorts and a white t-shirt and no bra. "I've got a date with Richie tonight. He's going to meet me here at 6:30. Want to wait with me so I don't get lonely?" "You wouldn't get lonely anyway," Amy said. "If you sat down alone, every guy in the place would be hanging on you in 2 minutes flat." Liz looked speculatively at the kids in the dive, then shook her head. "Nope. Once I've dated a guy and then dropped him, he knows it's over for good. And he knows it isn't worth his time to pitch for me a second time. So most of the guys in here wouldn't bother me if I sat down alone, because I've already screwed most of them." "Gross," Amy said. "But almost true," Liz said. "You're bad." "That's why the boys like me. Listen, are you going to keep me company till Richie gets here?" "Sure," Amy said. She went to the fountain and drew down 2 Cokes, and as she and Liz took the first booth at the front of the room, where they had a view of Main Street, Liz's car was parked out front. It was a yellow Toyota Celica. Her parents had given it to her as a surprise graduation gift. "No matter how hard I try," Amy said, "I can't picture you and Richie Atterbury as a couple." "Why not? We were both unique in school," Liz said. "He was down the class genius with an IQ of 180, and I was the class slut with 180 names on my scorecard." "I don't know why you keep putting yourself down like that. You haven't had anywhere near 180 guys, for God's sake." "I'm not putting myself down, honey. I revel in it. I love what I am, and it's the only way to fly." "Richie was always so shy." "He's not so shy anymore," Liz says. She winked. "Listen, it's been a ball teaching Richie what the game's all about. He was so gangly and clumsy and naive, a real challenge. But he's coming along. He's coming along real nice. And he has a real taste for corruption." "And you're corrupting him?" "Exactly. Isn't that a bit melodramatic?" "No, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm corrupting Richie Atterbury, boy genius. Elizabeth Ann Duncan, sultry temptress, the all-knowing wanton woman of exotic royal city," Amy said sarcastically. Liz grinned. "That's me. You know, just 3 weeks ago when I first started going out with him, Richie had never smoked grass. Can you imagine? Now he's a regular pothead." "That's the only reason you're dating him? Just so you can corrupt him?" "No. It's a hell of a lot of fun to open him up to new things and new experiences. But even if he already knew his way around, he'd be fun to be with. He's clever, witty, and he seems to know something interesting about almost everything. I've never dated a genius before. It's different." "I've never dated a genius before. Sounds like maybe this one will last a little longer than the others." "No way. I figure another month, 6 weeks at the outside, then bye-bye Richie. No matter how clever he is, I'll be bored with him by then. Besides, even if I wanted something permanent with someone, which I don't want, but even for some weird reason I did, I wouldn't want anything permanent with anyone here in this jerkwater town. I don't want anyone holding me back when I'm ready to split for the West." "You're still planning on going?" "Hell yeah. I'll work in my father's office until the middle of December, build up a nest egg, and then knock off a couple weeks before Christmas. After the holiday, I'll pack my clothes into my little yellow car, and I'll be off like a shot to the land of sun and opportunity." "California?" "I've decided on Vegas." "Las Vegas? That's the only Vegas I know." "What will you do there?" "Sell it." "Sell what?" "Don't be dopey." "I'm not being dopey." "As dense as a post." "I don't understand. What are you going to sell?" "My ass." "Huh." "I'm going to do some heavy hooking." hooking? Jesus! Listen, kid, don't you realize how much money a high priced call girl can make in Vegas? A six-figure income. That's how much. Amy stared at her in disbelief. You're trying to make me believe that you're going to Vegas to be a whore? I'm not trying to make you believe anything. I'm merely telling you the facts, kid. Besides, I'm not going to be an ordinary whore. Whore is a low class word. Whores are cheap. I'm going to be a personal escort, an intimate companion to a new gentleman every evening. Intimate companions are quite expensive, you know. And I'm going to be more expensive than most of them. You aren't serious. Of course I am. I've got a really good personality, a damn nice face, long legs, a cute little butt, and almost no waist at all. And these, she thrust her chest out, her large up-tilted breasts strained against the thin t-shirt. If I can learn not to spend every dime I make, and if I can find a few good investments, I'll be worth at least $1 million by the time I'm 25. You won't do it. Yup. You're putting me on. Nope, listen. I'm a regular nympho. I know that. You know that. Practically everyone knows that. I can't keep my hands off the guys, and I like variety. So if I'm going to be screwing around every day of the week, I might as well get paid for it. Amy stared at her searchingly, and Liz met her eyes. At last, Amy said, My God, you really mean it. Why not? Liz, a prostitute's life isn't pleasant. It isn't fun and games. It's lonely and grim. Who says? Well, everyone says. Everyone is full of shit. If you go away and do something like this, Liz, it'll be such a tragedy. That's what it'll be. You'll be throwing your whole life away, ruining everything. You sound like your mother. I don't either. Oh, yes, you do. You sound exactly like her. Amy frowned. I do. Smug, moralistic, self-righteous. I'm just worried about you. I know what I'm doing. Listen, when you're a high-priced call girl, you party all the time. What's so lonely and grim about that? It's fun and games, especially in Vegas, where there's never a dull minute. Amy was stunned. She had never imagined that she would one day have a friend who was a prostitute. For a while, they sat in silence, sipping their cokes and listening to a Bob Seger number that was blasting, and it was the force of a jackhammer. When the music stopped, Liz said, You know what would be really great? What? If you came along with me to Vegas. Me? Sure, why not? My God. Listen, I know I'm a damn desirable little package, but I'm not one bit sexier than you are. You've got just what it takes to be a huge success in Vegas. Amy laughed with embarrassment. You really do. Not me. They'd be standing in line for a chance to get in your pants. Listen, kid, in that town you outdraw Liberance and Frank Sinatra combined. Oh, Liz, I couldn't do that sort of thing. Not in a million years. You did it with Jerry. Not for money, which is foolish. Anyway, that was different. Jerry was my steady boyfriend. What's so great about steady? Did going steady mean anything to Jerry? He dumped you the second he heard you were knocked up. He wasn't considerate or sympathetic or loyal. Anything else is a steady is supposed to be. I guarantee you, none of the men you'd be escorting in Vegas would treat you that shabbily. With my luck, my first client would turn out to be a homicidal maniac with a butcher knife. No. Your clients would all come with seals of approval from a hotel pit bosses and other casino executives. They'd send you only the high rollers, doctors, lawyers, famous entertainers, millionaires, businessmen. You'd only take the best people. This may come to a surprise to you, Liz, but even a millionaire businessman can turn out to be a homicidal maniac with a butcher knife. It's rare, I'll grant you that, but it's not impossible. So you carry your own knife in your purse. If he starts acting creepy, you make the first cut. You have an answer for everything, don't you? I'm just a girl from little old Royal City, Ohio. But I'm not a hick. Well, I don't think I'll be going to Vegas with you at the end of the year. It's going to be a long, long time before I'm even ready to go on a nice, quiet, no sex date. I've sworn off men for a while. Bullshit. It's true. You have been a stick in the mud so far this summer, but that'll pass. No, I mean it. Last week you went to the doctor. I recommend it, Liz said smugly. So you got a prescription for the pill. Would you get a prescription for the pill if you were really intended to be a wallflower? You talked me into that. For your own good. I wish I hadn't gone to the doctor. I won't be needing the pill for anything else until I'm out of college. I'm going to sit back with my knees together and be virginal. Virginal? You mean like born again virgin? Like hell you are. 2 weeks from now, you'll be flat on your back, pinned under one stud or another. 2 weeks at most. I know it. I know you backwards and forwards, up and down, inside and out. You know how it is that I'm able to read you so clearly? It's because you're exactly like me. We're two of a kind, peas in a pod. Oh, not on the surface necessarily, but deep down, deep in your heart where it counts, you're exactly like me, honey. And that's why we'd be great together in Vegas. We'd have a ball. Richie Atterbury walked up to the table. He was tall, thin boy, not handsome, but not unattractive either. He had thick, dark hair, and he wore horn-rimmed glasses that made him look like a little bit like Clark Kent. Hi, Liz. Hi, Amy. Amy said, hello, Richie. That's a nice shirt you're wearing. You really think so? Yes, I like it a lot. Thanks. He looked at Liz with his big, lovesick puppy eyes, and he said, you ready for the movie? Can't wait, Liz said. She stood up. We're going to the drive-in. That's really fitting, too, because Richie sure knows how to drive it in. Richie blushed, and Liz laughed and said the only way I'm going to see much of this movie is if we set up a series of mirrors to reflect onto the ceiling of the car. Liz, you're terrible. Do you think I'm terrible? Liz asked Richie, batting her eyes. I think you're terrific. Daring to put an arm around her waist, he still seemed somewhat bashful, even if Liz had made him more than passingly familiar with sex and drugs. Liz looked at Amy. See, he thinks I'm terrific, and he was a class genius. So what do you know about it? Amy smiled in spite of herself. Listen, when you're ready to start living again, when you're sick and tired of playing Sister Purity, give me a call. I'll line someone up for you and we'll double date. Amy watched Liz and Richie as they walked outside and got into the yellow Celica. Liz drove. She pulled away from the curb with a torturous squeal of tires that made everyone in the dive look toward the front window. After Amy left the dive at 20 minutes till 7, she didn't go straight home. She walked aimlessly for more than an hour, not really window shopping in the stores she passed, not really noticing the houses she passed, not enjoying the clean spring evening, just walking and thinking about the future. When she got home at 8 o'clock, her father was in his workshop. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, leafing through a magazine, listening to a radio call-in program, and sucking on vodka and orange juice. If you didn't have dinner at work, Mom said, there's some cold roast beef in the refrigerator. Thank you, but I'm not hungry. I ate a big lunch. Suit yourself, Mama said. She turned up the volume on the radio. Amy interpreted that as a signal of dismissal, and she went upstairs. She spent an hour with Joey playing 500 Rummy, his favorite card game. The boy didn't seem himself. He hadn't been the old, effervescent Joey since Mama had made him get rid of his monster models and posters. Amy worked hard at making him laugh, and he did laugh, but his good humor seemed like a facade to her. He was tense underneath, and she hated to see him that way, but she couldn't figure out how to reach him and cheer him up. Later in her room, she stood nude again in front of the full-length mirror. She appraised her body with a critical eye, trying to decide if she indeed measured up to Liz. Her legs were long and quite well-shaped. Her thighs were taut. She had muscle tone in her whole body, which was very good. Her bottom was round and sort of perky, very firm. Her belly was not just flat, but slightly concave. Her breasts weren't as large as Liz's, but they weren't small by any definition, and they were extremely well-shaped, up-thrust with the large, dark nipples. It was definitely a body well designed for sex and for easily attracting and satisfying a man. The body of a courtesan. The body of, as Liz put it, an intimate companion. The legs and hips and buttocks and breasts of a whore. Was that what she had been born for? To sell herself? Was a future as a prostitute unavoidable? Was it somehow her destiny to spend thousands of sweaty nights clutching total strangers in hotel rooms? Liz said she saw corruption in Amy's eyes. Mama said the same thing. To Mama, that corruption was a monstrous evil thing that must be suppressed at all cost. But to Liz, it was nothing to be afraid of, something to be embraced. There couldn't be two people more different than Liz and Mama, yet they agreed on what was to be seen in Amy's eyes. Now Amy stared at her reflection in the mirror, peered into the windows of her soul, but although she looked very hard, she wasn't able to see anything more than the characterless surfaces of two dark and rather pretty eyes. She couldn't see either of the rot of hell or the grace of heaven. She was lonely, frustrated, and terribly, terribly confused. She wanted to understand herself. More than anything, she wanted to find the right role for herself in this world, so that for the first time in her life she would not feel tense and hopelessly out of place. If her hope of going to college and her dream of becoming an artist were unrealistic, then she didn't want to spend years struggling for what was not meant to be. Her life had been too much of a struggle already. She touched her breasts, and her nipples sprang up at once, stiff, proud, as large as the tips of her little fingers. Yes, this was a bad thing, a sinful thing, just as Mama said, yet it felt so good and so sweet. If she could be sure that God would listen to her, she would get down on her knees and ask him for a sign, an irrefutably holy sign that would tell her once and for all whether she was a good person or a bad person. But she didn't think God would listen to her after what she had done to the baby. Mama said she was bad, that something lurked inside of her, and that she had to let go of the reins that had been holding that something back. Mama said she had the potential to be evil, and a mother should know what kind of thing about a daughter. Shouldn't she? Shouldn't she? Before he went to bed, Jody counted the money in his bank again. During the past month, he had added $2.95 to the contents of the jar, and now he had exactly $32. He wondered if he would have to bribe someone at the carnival to let him run away with them. He figured he would need $20 as a minimum bankroll, which would keep him in grub until he started earning money as a carny, sweeping up after the elephants and doing whatever else a 10-year-old boy could find on the midway. So that left only $12 that he could spare for a bribe, I guess. Would that be enough? He decided to ask his father for $2 to go to the Sunday matinee at the Rialto Theater, but he wouldn't actually spend the money on the movies. He would go over to Tommy Culp's house and play tomorrow afternoon, pretend that he had seen the movie when his father asked about them, and add the $2 to his escape fund. He returned the bank to the desk. When he said his prayers before going to bed, he asked God to please keep Mama from getting pissed and coming into his room again. The next day, Sunday, Amy called Liz. "Hello," Liz said. "This is Sister Purity," Amy said. "Oh, hello, sister. I've decided to leave the nunnery." "Hallelujah! It's cold and drafty here in the nunnery. Not to mention boring. What have you got for me that I won't find boring? How about Buzz Clement?" "I don't know him." "He's 18, soon 19, I think. He was in the class ahead of ours." "Ah, an older man. But he dropped out of school in 11th grade. He works at the Arca station on the corner of Main and Broadway." "You sure know how to pick 'em." "He may not sound like much, but wait until you see him. He's a hunk." "A hunk of what?" "Pretty muscle." "Can he speak?" "Just well enough." "Can he tie his own shoelaces?" "I'm not sure, but he usually wears loafers, so you won't have to worry about that." "I hope you know what you're doing." "Trust me, you'll love him." What night should I set you up?" "Doesn't matter, I work days." "Tomorrow night?" "Fine. We'll double. Me and Richie, you and Buzz." "Where do you want to go?" "How about my place? We'll play some records, watch a movie on my folks' video cassette machine. Roll a few joints. I got some bitchin' grass that'll mellow us out real fast. What about your parents? They're leaving on a 2-week vacation today to New Orleans. I'll have the house all to myself. They trust you alone there for 2 weeks? And they trust me not to burn the place to the ground. And that's really all they care about. I'm glad you finally came to your senses. I was afraid summer was going to be a bummer. We'll sure raise hell now that you're back in the swing of things. I'm not sure I want to get back in the swing of things, at least not all the way, if you know what I mean. I want to have some fun. I want to date, but I don't think I'm going to screw around anymore. At least not until college is behind me. Yeah, I mean it. Take it at your own pace, honey. Anyway, we'll sure have some fun with my old man and old lady out of town. And the county fair's next week. Hey, yeah. I really get off on smoking some good dope and then hopping on those thrill rides. I suspect you would. And did you ever get high and then go through the fun house with all those fake monsters jumping out at you? No. It's hilarious. I look forward to it. Brief intermission before chapter 10. Chapter 10. Janet Middlemeyer was a safety engineer for the county. Her job was to make certain that all public buildings, courthouses, firehouses, libraries, schools, sheriff substations, government subsidized sports arenas, and stadiums, and so forth were all clean at all times, well lighted and safe for both visitors and workers. She was responsible for the inspection of the structural integrity of those buildings, as well as for the condition and suitability of all machinery and major non mechanical equipment within their walls. Janet was young, only a few years out of college, only 2 years on the job, and she was still as dedicated to her work as she had been when she had first started. Her duties seemed almost holy to her, and the words public trust still held some meaning for her, even if they didn't mean much to some of the people with whom she worked with. She had not yet been a public employee long enough to be tainted by the inevitable corrupting influences that were attendant to any government program. She still cared. On Monday, June 23rd, when the carnival came to Rockville, Maryland, Janet Middlemeyer presented herself at the office trailer that provided working space for Mr. Frederick Fredrickson, the silver-haired owner and operator of Big American Midway shows. With characteristics directness and crispness, Janet stated her intention of going through the lot from one end to the other until she was fully satisfied that the thrill rides and other larger attractions were safely erected. She would not approve the opening of the carnival if she felt that it represented a threat to the well-being of the citizens of her county. She was pushing her authority a little bit, perhaps even exceeding it. She wasn't entirely sure that the carnival's equipment came under her jurisdiction, even though it stood on the county-owned fairgrounds. The law was vague on that point. No one from the county office of public safety had ever inspected the carnival before, but Janet felt she couldn't shirk that responsibility. Just a few weeks ago, a young woman had died when a carnival ride had collapsed in Virginia. And although that tragic accident hadn't happened on the lot of a Big American Speedway, Janet was determined to put her Big American under a microscope before the fairground gates swung open. When she stated her intentions to Mr. Fredrickson, she was afraid that he would think she was trying to shake him down, and she didn't know quite how she would handle him if he tried to bribe her. She knew that carnivals employed a man whose job it was to bribe public officials. They called him the Patch because he went into town ahead of the show and patched things up with the police and certain other key government employees, lining their pockets with folding money and books of free tickets for their friends and families. If a patch didn't do his job, the police usually would raid the Midway, closing down all of the games, even if it was a straight carnival that didn't dupe the marks out of their money. Unpaid and angry about it, the police would shutter even the cleanest of girly shows and legally declare the thrill rides hazardous, quickly and effectively bringing the carnival to its knees. She didn't want the people at Big American to think she was after a fast buck. Fortunately, Mr. Fredrickson was a well-educated, well-spoken, courtly gentleman, not at all what she had expected, and he both recognized and admired her sincerity. No bribe was offered. He'd assured her that his people were as concerned about the health and safety of their consumers as she was, and he gave her permission to poke around in every corner of the Midway for as long as she liked. Fredericton's superintendent of transport, Max Fried, issued her a badge with letters VIP on it so that all the carnies would cooperate with her. For most of the morning and afternoon, wearing a hard hat, carrying a big flashlight and a notebook, Janet prowled the grounds, watching the Midways rise like a phoenix, inspecting bolts and rivets and spring lock joints, crawling into dark, tight spaces when it was necessary, overlooking nothing. She discovered that Frederick Fredrickson had been telling the truth. Big American was conscientious about the maintenance and the more than conscientious, downright fussy about the erection of rides and sideshows. At 3:15 she came to the fun house, which appeared to be ready for business a full hour and 15 minutes before the gates were scheduled to open. The area around the attraction was deserted and quiet. She wanted someone to give her a guided tour of the fun house, but she couldn't locate anyone associated with it, and for a moment she considered skipping the place. She hadn't found even one major safety problem anywhere else on the Midway, and it wasn't likely that she would uncover a dangerous construction code violation here. She'd probably just be wasting her time. Nevertheless, she had a strong sense of duty. She walked up to the boarding ramp, past the ticket booth, and stepped down into the sunken channel in which the gondolas would move when the ride was started up. From the boarding gate to the channel led to a set of large plywood doors that were painted to resemble the massive timbered iron hinge doors of a forbidding castle. When the ride was in service, the doors would swing back to admit each oncoming car, and then fall shut behind it. At the moment she approached the entire entrance, one door was propped open. She peered inside. The interior of the funhouse wasn't as dark now as it would be when the ride was in operation. A string of work lights ran the length of the track and disappeared around a bend 50 feet away. When the place was open for business, those lights would be extinguished, yet even with that chain of softly glowing bulbs, the funhouse was gloomy. Janet leaned through the doorway. "Hello?" No one answered. "Is anyone there?" she asked. Silence. She switched on her flashlight, hesitated only a second, and then stepped inside. The funhouse smelled damp and oily. She knelt and inspected the pins that joined two sections of the track. They were securely fastened. She got up and moved deeper into the building. On both sides of the track, slightly elevated from it, life-size mechanical figures stood in secret niches in the walls. An ugly, leering pirate with a sword in his hand, a werewolf, claws coated with silvery day-glow paint that would make them look like they were glinting blades in the dark. Phony but realistic blood on his wolfish snout and on the 2-inch-long fangs, a grinning and blood-drenched axe murderer standing over a hideously wounded corpse of one of his victims, and many others, some more gruesome than those first few. In this light, Janet could see that they were only clever, lifelike mannequins, but she felt uneasy around them. Although none of them was animated, as all of them would be once the funhouse was in operation, they looked as if they were about to pounce on her. To her chagrin, the damn things spooked her, but her dislike of them didn't prevent her from inspecting the anchor bolts on a few of them to make sure they wouldn't topple down into a passing gondola and injure a rider. Walking along the passageway, looking up at the monsters, Janet wondered why people insisted on referring to a place like this as a funhouse. She turned the bend at the end of the first length of track, moved further into the funhouse, and turned another corner, and then another, marveling at the richness of the invention that had been employed in the design of the place. It was huge, as large as a medium-sized warehouse, and it was crammed full of genuinely frightening things. It wasn't the sort of amusement that appealed to her, but she had to admire the work and the craftsmanship and the creativity that had gone into it. She was in the center of the enormous structure, standing on the track, looking up at a man-sized spider hanging overhead, when someone put a hand on her shoulder. She gasped, jumped, jerked away from the unexpected contact, turned and would have screamed if her throat hadn't frozen. A man was standing on the tracks behind her. He was extremely tall, at least 6.5 feet, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, and he was wearing a Frankenstein outfit. A black suit, a black turtleneck, monster gloves, a rubber mask that covered his entire head. Scared? He asked. His voice was exceptionally deep and hoarse. She swallowed hard, finally breathed, and said, "Yes, my God, you scared me half to death." My job." "What?" "Scare the Marks. My job." "Oh, you work here at the funhouse." "My job." She decided that he must be dull-witted. His simple, halting declarations resembled the speech pattern of a severely retarded child. Trying to be friendly, hoping to keep him friendly, she said, "My name is Janet. What's yours?" "Huh? What's your name?" "Gunther." "That's a nice name." "Don't like." "You don't like your name?" "No." "What would you like to be called?" "Victor." "That's a nice name, too." Victor, his favorite. Whose favorite? His. She realized that she was in a bad spot. A strange and poorly lighted place, out of sight, perhaps out of earshot of anyone who might be inclined to help her, alone, except for a badly retarded man big enough to break her in half, the way she might break a breadstick. He took a step toward her. She backed up. He stopped. She stopped too, shaking, aware that she couldn't outrun him. His legs were longer than hers, and he was probably more familiar with the terrain than she was. He made an odd sound behind the mask. It was like a dog sniffing busily at a scent. "I'm a government official," she said slowly, hoping he would understand. "A very important government official." Gunther said nothing. "Very important." She tapped the VIP badge that Max Fried had given her. "Mr. Fredrickson told me I could go anywhere I wanted to on the Midway. Do you know who he is? Do you know Mr. Fredrickson?" Gunther didn't reply. He just stood there, big as a truck, looking down at her, his face hidden behind that mask, his arms dangling limply at his side. "Mr. Fredrickson owns this carnival. You must know him. He's probably your boss. He told me I could go wherever I wanted." Finally, Gunther spoke again. "Smell woman." "What?" "Smell woman. Smell good. Pretty." "Oh, no." "Want pretty." "No, no. No, Gunther. That wouldn't be right. That would only get you in trouble." He was sniffling again. The mask seemed to interfere with the scent that he was trying to catch, and he reached up to pull the Frankenstein monster face off, revealing his own face. When Janet saw what had been hidden by the mask, she stumbled backward on the track and screamed. Before anyone could possibly have heard her cry, Gunther sprang at her and cut the scream short with one blow of his big hand. She fell. He dropped on top of her. 15 minutes before the fairground gates opened to the public, Conrad made a final inspection tour of the funhouse. He walked the length of the track to be sure there were no obstructions on it, no forgotten tools or misplaced pieces of lumber that might derail one of the gondolas. In the hall of the giant spiders, he found the dead woman. She was on the tracks, below one of the big, phony tarantulas. She was sprawled on top of her bloody clothes, naked, bruised, slashed. Her head had been torn clean off. It rested face up, a yard away from her body. At first he thought Gunther had killed a carnival woman. That was unquestionably the worst thing that could happen. The bodies of outsiders could be disposed of in such a fashion as to direct the police away from everyone connected with the big American Midway. But if one of the carnival's own was found raped and mutilated, the police would summon onto the lot, and Gunther would interest them sooner or later. The carnies accepted the boy now, as they accepted all freaks, because they didn't have any knowledge of his uncontrollable need to rape, kill, and taste blood. He hadn't always been this violent. The carnies knew he was different, but they didn't realize how dangerously different he had become during the past 3 years, when he had belatedly acquired a sex drive. No one ever paid much attention to Gunther. He was almost a shadow in their midst, a marginally perceived presence. But if a carny woman was killed, someone would take a much closer look at Gunther than ever before. and there would be no way to hide the truth. After an initial rush of panic, Conrad saw what the dead woman in front of him was not from the carnival. He had never seen her face before. There was still a chance that he could save Gunther and himself. Aware that he didn't have much time to conceal the evidence, Conrad stepped around the bloody remains and hurried towards the end of the Hall of Giant Spiders. Just before he reached the next turn in the tracks, he climbed out of the gondola channel and stepped to a tableau featuring two animated figures, a man and a man-sized spider locked in mortal combat. Unmoving now that there were no marks to witness their struggle, the battling man and tarantula were posed in front of a jumbled pile of papier-mâché boulders. Conrad went around and behind the false rocks and knelt down. The glow from the string of work lights above the tracks did not reach back here. He put a hand out in the darkness in front of him and felt the rough board floor. After a few seconds, he located the ring bolt for which he had been searching. He pulled on the ring, lifting the trap door, one of 6 that were scattered around the funhouse for maintenance purposes. He slid on his belly backwards through the trap, feeling with his feet for the rungs of the slanted ladder that he knew was there. He found the ladder and descended into pitch blackness. Just after his head was below the funhouse floor, his feet touched a plank flooring at the bottom level. He pushed away from the ladder and stood up straight. He reached into the darkness on his right side, passed a hand through the air, and found the light chain and pulled it. 24 bulbs came on all over the basement, but the place was still shadowy. He was in a low-ceilinged room full of machinery, cogwheels, cables, belts, pulleys, chain-driven mechanisms of odd design. These were the mechanical guts of the funhouse. Turning away from the ladder, Conrad sidled between 2 machines and stepped into a narrow aisle between the banks of long, notched tables that were stretched across a series of large metal wheels. He hurried to the northwest corner of the chamber, where there was a workbench, a tool cabinet, a metal rack full of spare parts, a pile of tarps, and a couple of suits of coveralls. Conrad quickly pulled off his Barker jacket, stepped out of his trousers, and wriggled into a pair of coveralls. He didn't want to explain blood-stained clothes to Ghost. He picked up one of the tarps and rushed back up the ladder. Upstairs in the funhouse again, he returned to the dead woman on the tracks. He glanced at his wristwatch. Today's show call was for 4:30, and that was precisely the time his watch showed him. At this very moment, the fairground gates were swinging open, and the marks were pouring through. Within 10 minutes, the first of them would be buying tickets for the funhouse. Ghost wouldn't start the system until he'd gotten a final report on the condition of the track. He must be wondering what was taking Conrad so long. In 2 or 3 minutes, he would come looking. Conrad spread the tarp out in the gondola channel. He picked up the still warm body and dropped it in the middle of the sheet of canvas. He grabbed the long, trailing hair and lifted the woman's severed head, its mouth open, its eyes wide, and put that on the tarp as well. He added her shredded, bloody clothes to the pile, and then flashlight, a small notebook, and a hard hat. What sort of woman wore a hard hat? What had she been doing in the funhouse? He looked for a purse. A woman ought to be carrying a purse, but he couldn't find one. At last, panting from the exertion, he pulled the ends of the tarp together, lifted it, and hefted it out of the gondola channel. He placed it on the ledge where the man and the spider were temporarily frozen in combat. He scrambled to the ledge after the tarp, and he heard someone call his name. "Conrad?" With a sinking heart, Conrad looked back along the tracks down the gloomy gondola tunnel. It was Ghost. The albino was standing 50 feet away at the far end of the straightaway, just inside the entrance to the Hall of the Giant Spiders. He was only a pale silhouette. Conrad wasn't able to see the albino's face. And if I can't see him clearly, he can't see me any better. Conrad thought, relieved. He can't see the tarp, and even if he can see it, he can't possibly know what's in it. "Conrad." "Yeah, here." "Is something wrong?" No, nothing. The gates are open. We'll have marks swarming all over us in a couple minutes." Conrad crouched beside the tarp, using his body to further block Ghost's view of it. "There was some kind of junk on the track, but it's okay now. I've taken care of it." "You need some help?" "Nah. I've got everything under control. You better get out front, throw the switch, and start selling tickets. We're ready to roll." "Are you sure?" "Course I'm sure. Get moving. I'll be out in a few minutes." Ghost hesitated for just a second, then turned and walked back the way he'd come. As soon as the albino was out of sight, Conrad dragged the tarp behind the papier-mâché boulders. He had a little bit of trouble squeezing the grisly bundle through the trap door. He leaned in after it, lowered it the length of his arm, and then let it drop the rest of the way. It landed at the foot of the ladder, the tarp flopped open, and the ghastly disembodied head looked up at him, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Conrad went down the ladder again. He closed the trap door above him. He bent, gathered up the corners of the tarp, and dragged the corpse to the maintenance area in the northwest corner of the funhouse. Overhead, the building was abruptly filled with eerie, tape-recorded music as ghosts started switching on the system. Grimacing, Conrad picked up the dead woman's gore-splattered clothes, one piece at a time. He checked the pockets of her jeans, jacket, and blouse, looking for some scrap of identification. He found her car keys right away. Attached to the king ring was one of those miniature license plates that were sold by some veteran organizations. The number on it was the number on her real plates. Even before he had finished his search of her clothes, he saw the big American Midway VIP badge pinned to her blouse. That discovery rocked him. If she was someone with important carnival connection, Gunther's secret could no longer be concealed. Conrad found the sort of thing he was looking for in the last pocket he turned out. It was a laminated ID card that said she was Janet Leigh Midler, and she worked for the County Office of Public Safety. She was a safety engineer, whatever the hell that was, and she was accredited by the state of Maryland. A government official. That was bad. But not as bad as he had feared. At least she wasn't a sister or cousin of one of the carnies. She didn't have any friends or relatives on the lot, so no one would be looking for her. Evidently, she had been in the Midway strictly in the professional capacity, making spot safety checks. No one would have realized that she had disappeared in the middle of one of those inspections, because no one would have been paying special attention to her. There was a good chance that Conrad could move the body and plant it far away from the carnival in such a way that the police would think she had been killed after she quit working. But he couldn't do anything more until it was dark. It would be a risky bit of business even then. Now he had to get out front on the Barker's platform before ghosts started wondering what had happened to him and came looking again. Conrad took a coil of rope from one of the storage shelves and threaded it through the eyelets around the edges of the tarpaulin. Then he pulled the rope like a drawstring and made a bag out of the tarp. With the dead woman and her belongings inside, he put the bag in the corner. He stripped out of the bloody coveralls and put them with the bag. His hands were bloody. He wiped them off like best he could on a couple of dirty rags that were in the workbench. Then he put the rags with his coveralls. Finally, he stacked the other tarps on top of it all and hoped that the incriminating evidence was nothing to be found but a mound of rumpled canvas. No one would stumble across the dead woman, at least not during the few hours she would be there. Conrad put on his street clothes and left the fun house by a rear door. Because the basement wasn't underground, the door opened onto the warm late afternoon sunshine behind the building. He walked to the nearest comfort station because the gates had opened only 10 minutes ago, and there weren't yet any marks in the restrooms. Conrad scrubbed his hands until they were as clean as a surgeon's. He returned to the fun house and walked around to the front of it. The giant clown face was laughing. Elton, one of Conrad's employees, was selling tickets. Ghost was working at the boarding gate, and Gunther was dressed like Frankenstein monster and was growling enthusiastically at the marks. He sawed Conrad, and they stared at each other for just a moment. And although they were too far apart to see each other's eyes, an understanding passed between them. I did it again. I know. I found her. What now? I'll protect you. Until night fell over the fairgrounds, Conrad worked on the pitchman's platform, volleying the marks, drawing them in with his polished spiel. As soon as darkness came, he complained of a migraine headache and told Ghost that he was going back to his motorhome to lie down. Instead, he went to the large parking area adjacent to the fairgrounds, and he searched for Janet Midler's car. He had the miniature license plate on her keyring to guide him, and even though there were a great many cars to check through, he located her Dodge Omni in just half an hour. He drove the Omni onto the lot through the service gate, well aware that he was leaving an evidential trail in other people's memories, but there was nothing else he could do. He parked in the shadows behind the funhouse. The service alley was deserted at the moment. He hoped nobody would stroll past on the way to the comfort station. He entered the funhouse basement through the rear door and carried out the tarp that contained the corpse. While the marks screamed at mechanical monsters in the dark tunnels overhead, he put the gruesome bundle into the Omni's trunk, and then he drove away from the fairgrounds. Although he had never been so bold before, he decided the best place to leave the dead woman was in her own home. If the police thought that she had been murdered in her own house by an intruder, they wouldn't be likely to link the killing with the carnival. It would look like just another random act of senseless violence. The sort of things cops saw all the time. 2 miles from the fairgrounds, in the supermarket parking lot, he looked through the car trying to find some indication of where Janet Midler lived. He discovered her purse under the front seat where she had left it while making her inspection tour of the carnival. He went through the contents of the purse and found her address on her driver's license. With the help of a map that he had picked up at the Exxon station, Conrad managed to find the pleasant apartment complex in which the woman lived. There were a number of long 2- and 3-story colonial buildings angled through and around a park-like ground. Janet Midler's unit was on the ground floor, thankfully. At the corner of one of the buildings, there was an empty parking slot behind her place, not more than 15 feet from her back door. The apartment was dark, and Conrad hoped that she lived alone. He hadn't found anything to indicate that she was married. There were no rings on her hands, nothing in her purse bore the words Mrs. Of course, she might have a girlfriend roaming with her, or there might be a live-in boyfriend. That could mean trouble. Conrad was prepared to kill anyone who walked in on him while he was disposing of the body. He got out of the car, leaving the dead woman in the Omni trunk, and he let himself into her apartment. A quick check of the closet in the single bedroom was sufficient to convince him that Janet lived by herself. He stood at the kitchen window and watched as a car drove into the parking area. 2 people got out of it and went into an apartment 2 doors away. At the same time, a man left yet another apartment, got into a Volkswagen Rabbit, and drove off. When all was quiet again, Conrad went out to the Omni, took the tarp from the trunk, and carried it inside, hoping that no one was watching him from a window in one of the other apartments. He took the tarp into the small bathroom and opened it there. Taking care to keep himself clean, he lifted the canvas and dumped the contents into the bathtub. There was still a great deal of blood trapped in the torn body cavity, and he spread some of the viscous stuff around, smearing it on the walls and the floor. It took a macabre pride in the cleverness of his plan. If he had left the dead woman in the bedroom, the police pathologist would have realized that once she hadn't been killed there, for they wouldn't have found enough blood on the carpet to support that theory. Most of her blood had been spilled in the funhouse on the gondola tracks and had soaked into the boards there. But when the cops found her here in the bedroom, maybe they would think that the missing pints of blood had simply gone down the bathtub drain. Conrad remembered the VIP badge on her blouse. He fished that out of the tub and stuck it in his jacket pocket. He also retrieved her hard hat, flashlight, and notebook, which were spotted with blood. He cleaned those off at the sink, then took them out to the foyer closet and put them on the shelf above the coat rack. He didn't know whether that was where she usually kept those items, but police wouldn't know that either, and it seemed likely enough place. He folded the empty tarp. In the kitchen, in the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights, he inspected his hands carefully. When he had washed them in the bathroom, when he had cleaned the articles that he had taken to the foyer closet, but there was still some blood caked under his fingernails. He went to the kitchen sink and washed his hands once more, very vigorously. He found the drawer in which the dead woman had kept her dish towels. He wrapped one of the towels around his right hand and took another one to the kitchen door. He opened the door, which had 3 small decorative windows arranged in the center of it. He looked out at the parking lot under the stark light of the sodium vapor lamps. There was no sound or motion. He put the folded dish towel against the exterior surface of one of the door's little panes, and then he stuck the interior surface with his wrapped right hand, trying to make as little noise as possible. The glass broke with only a dull crack, and he used the folded towel to push the fragments inward into the kitchen floor, so that it would look as if the killer had smashed the pane from inside and in the process of forcing entry. Conrad quietly closed the door, shook the dish towels to be certain there were no slivers of glass clinging to the fabric, refolded them, and returned them to the drawer in which he had found them. He suddenly realized that the threads from the dish towels might be snagged on the shards of glass. He stared down at the bright fragments. He didn't have time to examine each of them. Likewise, he didn't have time to study the trunk of her car with a magnifying glass to see if there were any spots of blood in it. There were probably other loose ends, too. He would just have to do the best he could and trust in the protection of the dark God who guided him. He left Janet Midler's car keys on the kitchen counter and picked up the folded tarp. As he stepped out of the apartment, he wiped the doorknobs with his handkerchief. He didn't have an arrest record. His fingerprints were not on file anywhere, but nevertheless, he was cautious. He walked away from the apartment complex. The fairgrounds lay 9 miles to the west, but he wasn't going to cover the entire distance on foot. He intended to call a taxi to take him back to the carnival, but he didn't want to risk summoning a ride from anywhere near the Mittelmeyer apartment. The cab driver would keep a record of the trip and might even remember his passenger's face. A mile from the woman's place, he disposed of the tarp in a big trash bin behind another apartment building, and after walking another mile, he came to a Holiday Inn. He stopped in the hotel bar, had 2 double scotches, and then took a cab to the fairgrounds. In the taxi, he thought back over what he had done from the moment he had found the corpse on the gondola tracks, and as far as he could see, he hadn't made any serious mistakes. The cover-up probably would work. Gunther would remain free, at least a while longer. Conrad couldn't let them take Gunther from him. Gunther was his son, his very special child, his own blood. But more than that, Gunther was a gift from hell. He was Conrad's instrument of revenge. When Conrad finally found Ellen's children, he would kidnap them, take them to an isolated place where their screams couldn't be heard, and turn them over to Gunther. He would encourage Gunther to play with them in a cat-and-mouse fashion. He would urge Gunther to torture them for several days, use them sexually again and again, no matter if they were girls or boys, and then, only then, tear them apart. Sitting in the darkness in the back of the taxi, Conrad smiled. He seldom smiled these days. He hadn't laughed in a long, long time. He wasn't amused by those things that amused other people. Only death, destruction, cruelty, and damnation, the dark handiwork of the god of evil, whom he worshipped, could bring a smile to his lips. Ever since he was 12 years old, he had been unable to obtain joy or satisfaction from innocent, wholesome pleasures. Not since that night, Christmas Eve, 40 years ago. The Straker family always decorated their house from top to bottom for Christmas season. They had a tree as tall as the ceiling would allow. Every room was festooned with evergreen wreaths, nut wreaths, candles, nativity scenes, tinsel, Christmas cards received from friends and relatives, and much more. The year that Conrad turned 12, his mother added a new piece to the family's enormous collection of holiday decorations. It was an all-glass oil lantern. The flame was reflected and refracted with the angle walls of the lamp, so that there were 100 images of fire instead of just one, and the eye was amazed and dazzled. Young Conrad was fascinated by the lantern, but was not permitted to touch it because he might burn himself. He knew he could handle the lantern safely, but he couldn't convince his mother of that. So when everyone else was asleep, he crept downstairs, struck a match, lit the lantern, and accidentally knocked it over. Burning oil spilled across the living room floor. At first he was sure he could put out the fire by beating it with a sofa cushion, but just a minute later, when he realized his folly, it was too late. He was the only one to escape unscathed. His mother died in the blaze, his 3 sisters died, his 2 brothers died. Papa didn't die, but he was scarred for life, his chest, his left arm, his neck, and left side of his face. The loss of his family left Papa with mental and emotional scars, every bit as horrendous as his physical injuries. He wasn't able to accept the idea that God, in whom Papa devoutly believed, would let such a tragic accident happen on Christmas Eve of all nights. He refused to believe it had been an accidental. He'd made up his mind that Conrad was evil and had set the fire on purpose. From that day until Conrad finally ran away several years later, his life was hell. Papa constantly badgered and accused him. He was not allowed to forget what he had done. Papa reminded him of it 100 times a day. Conrad breathed guilt and wallowed in self-hatred. He had never been able to run away from his shame. It came back to him every night in his dreams, even now that he was 52 years old. His nightmares were full of fire and screams and scarred, twisted faces of his father. When Ellen became pregnant, Conrad had been certain that at last God was giving him a chance to redeem himself by raising a family, by giving his own children a wonderful life filled with love and happiness. Perhaps he would be able to atone for the death of his mother, his sisters, his brothers. Month by month, as Ellen became heavier with child, Conrad became increasingly sure that the baby was the beginning of his salvation. When Victor was born initially, for just a few hours, Conrad had thought that God was heaping more punishment on him. Rather than give him a chance to atone for his sins, God seemed to be rubbing his face in them, telling him in no uncertain terms that he would never know grace and spiritual comfort. After the first bitter shock had passed, Conrad began to see his mutant son in a different light. Victor hadn't come from heaven. He'd come from hell. The baby was not punishment from God. It was a great blessing from Satan. God has turned his back on Conrad Stracker, but Satan had sent him a baby as a gesture of welcome. That might have seemed like torturous reasoning to a normal man, but to Conrad, desperate to find release from his guilt and shame, it made perfect sense. If the gates of heaven were forever closed to him, he might as well face the gates of hell with eagerness to accept his destiny without remorse. He longed to belong somewhere, anywhere, even in hell. If the God of light and beauty would not take him or give him absolution, then he would obtain it from the God of darkness and evil. He read dozens of books about satanic religions, and he had quickly discovered that hell was not the place of brimstone and suffering that Christians had said it was. Hell was a place, said to the Satanists, where sinners were rewarded for their sins. It was, in every respect, the place of their dreams. Best of all, in hell there was no such thing as guilt. In hell there was no shame. As soon as he accepted Satan as his savior, Conrad knew he had made the right decision. The nightly dreams of fire and pain did not stop. However, he found a greater measure of peace and more contentment in his daily life than he had known before that Christmas. And for the first time in memory, his life had meaning. He was on earth to do the devil's work, and if the devil could offer him self-respect, he was prepared to labor long and hard for the cause of the anarchist. When Ellen killed Victor, Conrad knew she was doing God's work, and he was furious. He'd almost killed her, but he realized that he might be imprisoned or executed for murdering her, and that would keep him from fulfilling the role that Satan had written for him. It occurred to him that if he got married again, Satan might send him another sign, another demonic child who would grow up to be the scourge of the earth. Conrad married Zina, and in time, Zina bore him Gunther. She was the devil's Mary, but she didn't realize it. Conrad never told her the truth. Conrad saw himself as Joseph to the anarchist father and protector. Zina thought the child was just a freak, and although she didn't feel comfortable with it, she accepted it with the equanimity in which carnies always accepted freaks. But Gunther wasn't merely a freak. He was more than that, much more. He was holy. He was the coming, the dark coming. As the taxicab sped towards the fairgrounds, Conrad looked out at the quiet suburban houses and wondered if even one person out there realized they were living in the last days of God's world. He wondered if one of them sensed that Satan's child was on earth and had recently reached its brutal maturity. Gunther was just beginning his reign of terror. 1,000 years of darkness would descend. Oh yes, Gunther was much more than just a freak. If he were merely a freak, that would mean that Conrad was wrong in everything that he had done during the past 25 years. It would mean more than that. It would mean that Conrad was not just wrong, but stark, raving mad. So Gunther was more than a freak. Gunther was that legendary dark beast slouching towards Bethlehem. Gunther was the destruction of the world. Gunther was the herald of a new dark age. Gunther was the anarchist. He had to be. For Conrad's sake, he had to be.